My husband spent 28 years in America building a life he was always planning to leave. Every year he said the same thing. Next year, Priya. Next year we go home. And every year something kept us here. His job, our son, our grandchild, our mortgage, our fears. And then, one day, in a hospital room in Austin, with machines beeping and the lights too bright, and my hand holding his, he didn't say my name. He said the name of a city, the city where he was born, the city we had been promising to return to for 28 years. And then he was gone, and I was left alone in a country that had taken everything I had given it, and had given me back something I am still trying to name. I am Priya. I am 57 years old. I came to America at 29 with one suitcase, a 6-year-old son, and a husband who believed in promises. This is the story of what happened to those promises, and of what I decided to do when I finally understood that I had been waiting my entire life for a permission that no one was ever going to give me. Stay until the end, because this story does not end the way you are expecting. I was 29 years old when we came to the United States. Vikram had received a position at an engineering firm in Edison, New Jersey, one of those cities where the Indian community had grown so large that you could spend an entire Sunday without speaking a single word of English if you chose not to. I remember thinking, when we first arrived, that perhaps it would not be so different, that we would keep our life, our language, our habits, and simply place them inside a larger country, the way you place a photograph inside a new frame. The photograph stays the same. Only the frame changes. I was wrong, of course, but I did not know that yet. We came with one suitcase each and with our son Aryan, who was 6 years old at the time and already asking questions faster than I could answer them. Why is the sky a different color here, Mama? Why do people not take off their shoes at the door? Why does the bread not taste the same? 6 years old and already noticing everything. I held his hand at the airport and told him that we were going to have an adventure. He looked at me with those large, serious eyes he had even as a child, and said, "Okay, Mama, but when do we go back?" I laughed. I told him soon. I believed it when I said it. The first years were the hardest in the way that first years always are. Not dramatically hard. Not the kind of hard that breaks you all at once, but the kind that wears you down slowly, like water on stone. I learned to drive on the right side of the road. I learned to shop in supermarkets where nothing smelled the way food was supposed to smell. I learned to smile at neighbors whose names I would never quite remember, and who would never quite remember mine. I learned to be cold in a way I had not known was possible, not just the cold of winter, though that was real enough, but the cold of invisibility, of being in a place that did not know your history, and did not particularly need to. Vikram adapted faster than I did. He was always like that, practical, forward-moving, the kind of man who decides that a thing must be done, and then does it, without spending too much time mourning what came before. Within 2 years he had been promoted. Within 5 he had bought us a house, a real house with a garden, and a garage, and a mailbox with our last name on it, Sharma, in neat black letters. He was proud of that mailbox. He showed it to me the day we moved in, as if it were proof of something. I smiled because I loved him, and because the pride on his face was genuine and beautiful. But standing there on that driveway in the November cold, what I felt inside was something more complicated than pride. Something closer to the feeling you get when a door closes behind you, and you realize only after the click that you did not bring your keys. We were happy. I want to say that clearly because what comes later is painful, and I do not want anyone to think that the pain erases what came before. We were genuinely happy. Vikram was a good man, a patient man, a man who brought me jasmine flowers when he could find them at the Indian market even though they were never quite right, never quite the jasmine of Pune. But he brought them anyway, because he knew what they meant to me. We built a life together in that house in New Jersey. We cooked together on weekends. We called our families in India every Sunday. His mother in Pune, my parents in Nagpur, My sister, Kamini, who always answered the phone already talking as if the conversation had started before the call. We went to the temple on festival days. We kept what we could keep. Arian grew up the way children grow up in America when they arrive at 6 years old. Completely. By the time he was 12, he was more American than Indian in every way that could be measured from the outside. His English had no accent. His friends were a mixture of nationalities, but mostly American. He played baseball. He watched football. He ate hamburgers without the slightest hesitation and looked at the food I cooked with an expression that was not quite rejection, but was not quite enthusiasm either. He was a good boy, kind and obedient and genuinely loving, but he was becoming someone I recognized more from the outside than the inside, the way you recognize a building you have seen in photographs, but never entered. It was around that time, when Arian was 12 or 13, that Vikram and I began talking seriously about going back. Not immediately, not in a dramatic way, but in the quiet way that a conversation starts when two people realize they are thinking the same thing at the same time. We would sit on the back porch in the evenings after dinner, Vikram with his tea, and me with mine, and we would talk about Pune, about Nagpur, about what it would be like to retire there, to spend our later years in a place that knew us. We talked about the weather first, because weather is the safe beginning of any conversation about longing. The heat, we said, the monsoon, the way the air smells before rain in India, that specific smell of wet red earth that has no equivalent in any other part of the world. Then we talked about the people, his mother who was getting older, my parents who were getting older, my sister Kamini, who had 3 children I barely knew growing up. We talked about what we were missing and what we were trading it for, and whether the trade still made sense now that Arian was nearly grown, and the mortgage was nearly paid, and the reasons to stay were becoming harder to name with the same certainty we had named them 10 years before. We made a promise on one of those evenings. I remember it was summer because the garden was full, and the fireflies were doing what fireflies do in New Jersey summers, appearing and disappearing like small questions without answers. Vikram put down his cup of tea and looked at me with that direct look he had, the look that meant he was about to say something he had been thinking about for longer than the conversation suggested. He said, "Priya, when Arian finishes university, we go back." "Not maybe. We go." I looked at him. I looked at the fireflies. I said, "Yes, we go." That was the promise. Arian finished university 11 years later, and we did not go back. I could give you a list of reasons why we did not go back when Arian finished university. The list is long, and every item on it sounded reasonable at the time. Arian had just started his first job at a technology company in Austin, and was struggling in the way young people struggle when they first enter the world alone, with money, with loneliness, with the gap between what they expected adult life to be and what it actually is. Vikram said we should wait 1 more year, just to make sure Arian was settled. I agreed because I wanted to agree, because the truth is that I was not entirely ready either, and Vikram's reason gave me permission to delay something I both wanted and feared in equal measure. Then Vikram's mother fell ill in Pune, not gravely, not immediately, but enough that the conversation about returning took on a different shape, enough that Vikram began sending more money home, making more phone calls, spending his Sunday evenings on video calls with his brothers, rather than sitting with me on the back porch talking about fireflies and futures. His mother recovered slowly over the course of that year, and during that year of recovery, Arian met Jessica. Jessica was from Ohio. She was kind and intelligent and genuinely warm in the way that some Americans are warm, openly, without reservation, without the layers of formality that I had grown up with, and that still felt natural to me even after 20 years in this country. She laughed easily. She asked me questions about India with real curiosity, not the polite curiosity of someone waiting for you to finish speaking, but the kind that makes you feel that your answer matters. I liked her. I want to say that clearly because what comes later could make it seem otherwise. I liked Jessica from the beginning, and I like her still. But liking someone and understanding the life they represent are two different things, and I understood the first time Aryan brought her to our house for dinner that the conversation about returning to India had just become significantly more complicated. They married 2 years later. It was a beautiful wedding, a mixture of Indian and American traditions that Jessica's family embraced with genuine enthusiasm, and that my family in India watched through a laptop screen propped on a chair at the end of the banquet table, because the time difference made it impossible for my parents to come, and my father's health no longer permitted long flights. I remember looking at that laptop screen during the ceremony, at my mother's face, pixelated and slightly delayed, and feeling something split inside me that I could not name then, and can only partially name now. It was the feeling of a life dividing into two halves that would never again fit seamlessly together. Vikram and I did not talk about returning to India for almost a year after the wedding. It was not a decision we made consciously. It was more like a subject that quietly left the room while we were looking elsewhere. There was always something more immediate to discuss. The apartment Aryan and Jessica were renting, the promotion Vikram was hoping for, my mother's arthritis, the garden that needed replanting. Life is very skilled at filling the spaces where difficult conversations used to live. It was Vikram who brought it back. He brought it back on a Tuesday morning in March, which I remember because March in New Jersey has a particular quality of gray that makes everything feel more serious than it might otherwise be. He came to the kitchen where I was making chai, and he sat at the table without saying anything for a moment, the way he did when he was preparing to say something he had been carrying for a while. Then he said, "Priya, I think we need to talk about Pune." I turned from the stove. I looked at him. He looked older than I remembered him looking the day before, though, of course, that was not possible. It was simply that some mornings the light is honest in a way that other mornings are not. He said he had been thinking about his mother, who was 81 years old and increasingly frail, who had 3 sons but none of them nearby, who was being cared for by a woman who came twice a day, and who, according to Vikram's brother Suresh, sometimes cried in the evenings without knowing exactly why. He said he had been thinking about his own age, 61, still healthy, still capable, but aware in the way that people in their 60s become aware that the window of good years is not infinite. He said he had been thinking about the promise we made on the porch with the fireflies, and he wanted to know if I still believed in it. I sat down across from him. I wrapped my hands around my cup of chai, and I told him the truth, which was that I thought about it every day, that I thought about my sister Kamini's voice on the phone and how I knew from the sound of it that she was getting older in ways I was not witnessing, that I thought about my parents, both still alive then but diminished in the specific way that people in their 80s become diminished, smaller, slower, lighter, as if preparing to become something other than physical. That I thought about Pune, which I had not seen in 4 years, and Nagpur, which I had not seen in 3, and that thinking about them had begun to feel less like nostalgia and more like grief, as if I were mourning places that were still there. We decided that year Aryan was settled. Jessica was part of the family. There was no longer a reason to wait that we could honestly defend to ourselves. Vikram would retire in 2 years. At 63, I would go with him. We would sell the house in New Jersey or perhaps rent it. We had not decided that part yet. We would go to Pune first, spend time with his mother, and then figure out the shape of the life we wanted to build there. It was not a complete plan, but it was a real one. The first real one we had made since that evening with the fireflies. Then Aryan called us on a Sunday in October to tell us that Jessica was pregnant. I remember the silence in the kitchen after Vikram hung up the phone. Not an unhappy silence. The news was good news, genuinely good, and we both felt the goodness of it immediately and completely. A grandchild. The word landed in my chest like something warm and heavy and entirely new. I had not known until that moment how much I had wanted it, without knowing I wanted it. Vikram looked at me across the kitchen and I looked at him, and we did not need to say anything. because after 31 years of marriage, there are conversations that happen entirely in the space between two people without a single word being spoken. The conversation we had in that kitchen in October said, "We are not going yet. The grandchild comes first. We will wait a little longer, just a little longer." Nadia was born the following June. She had Arian's eyes and Jessica's mouth, and a way of looking at the world from her first days that reminded me of no one so much as Vikram's mother. That quality of serious attention, of taking in everything before deciding how to respond. Vikram held her at the hospital, and something happened to his face that I had never seen happen before in 31 years of watching his face. Something opened, something that had been carefully managed and contained for a very long time, simply opened and was no longer manageable. He held that baby, and he wept, quietly, without embarrassment, the way men weep when they have run out of reasons not to. We moved to Austin that year to be closer to them. We sold the New Jersey house, the house with the mailbox that said Sharma in neat black letters, the house where Arian had grown up and where we had spent 23 years building something that felt permanent, until the day we put it on the market and discovered that permanence is mostly a feeling and not a fact. We bought a small apartment 12 minutes from Arian and Jessica's house, close enough to be present, far enough to give them their space. It was a careful distance, measured in love and in the specific mathematics of a family that spans two cultures and is still learning the rules. Vikram retired. We were in Austin. We had our granddaughter, and Pune was still there, waiting with the patience that cities have, the patience of places that existed before you and will exist after you and can afford to wait. We said we would go for a visit first, a long visit, 3 months, to see how it felt, to see his mother, to see my family, to decide. We booked the tickets for March of the following year. We told his brother Suresh. We told my sister Kamini, who cried on the phone in a way that made me cry too, both of us crying across 12 time zones for reasons that were about more than a visit, and we both knew it. We never took that flight. In January, 2 months before we were supposed to leave, Vikram began having headaches. Not the ordinary kind. The kind that made him sit very still in a dark room with his eyes closed. The kind that came with a nausea that left him pale and quiet in a way that was entirely unlike him. We went to the doctor. The doctor sent us to another doctor. That doctor sent us to a specialist. The specialist used words I had heard before, in the abstract, the way you hear words on television or in other people's stories, but had never heard directed at someone sitting next to me in a beige office with bad lighting and a plant in the corner that needed watering. The tickets to Pune expired, unused. What followed was 18 months that I will not describe in detail because some things are not meant to be narrated but only survived. I will say that Vikram was brave in the specific way that quiet men are brave, without announcement, without drama, doing what needed to be done each day, and saving his fear for the moments when he thought I was not watching, which was a consideration he maintained until very near the end. I will say that Arian was present in a way that made me proud of him, in a way I had not known how to feel before. The kind of pride that has nothing to do with achievement and everything to do with character. I will say that Jessica was there in ways she did not have to be, and chose to be anyway. And I will say that, through all of it, Vikram never stopped talking about Pune. Not obsessively, not with bitterness, but in the way that a person talks about the thing that organizes their interior life when the exterior life has become uncertain. He would mention a street, a restaurant, the specific light of Pune in the early morning before the city fully woke up. He mentioned his mother, who had died the year before, without him having been able to say goodbye in person, a wound he carried quietly, but that I could see in him the way you can see something beneath water if the light is right. He talked about the monsoon. He talked about the temple near his childhood home. He talked about small things that were not small at all. And then on a Tuesday evening in September, in a hospital room in Austin with a window that looked out onto a parking garage, he said the word Pune one last time, in a voice that was almost no voice at all, and then he was gone. I held his hand for a long time after. The nurses gave me that time without being asked, which was a kindness I have not forgotten. I held his hand, and outside the window the parking garage lights came on one by one as the evening arrived, and I thought about a porch in New Jersey, and fireflies, and a promise, and I thought about how the cruelest thing about broken promises is not the breaking. It is the moment you realize the breaking was not a single decision, but 1,000 small ones, each of them reasonable, each of them made with love, and each of them adding up to something you never intended and cannot now undo. We buried Vikram in Austin. There was a cremation ceremony first, performed by a priest Aryan found through the local Indian community, a gentle older man from Kerala, who chanted the prayers with the correct gravity, even though he had never met Vikram and was working from the information we gave him on a piece of paper the night before. I sat through that ceremony in a state that I can only describe as being simultaneously completely present and completely elsewhere. I heard every word of the prayers. I felt the heat of the fire. I held Nadia on my lap because she was 3 years old and too young to understand what was happening, but old enough to feel that something serious had shifted in the world of the adults around her. She sat very still on my lap, which was unlike her, and every few minutes she would look up at my face and then look away again, as if she were checking something, and then deciding not to ask about it yet. After the ceremony, Aryan came to me and asked if I wanted Vikram's ashes to be scattered in India. He asked it carefully, in the voice he uses when he is trying to do the right thing, and is not entirely sure what the right thing is. I looked at my son, this man who had been a 6-year-old boy asking questions at an American airport 34 years ago, and I thought about what Vikram would have wanted. The answer was not complicated. Vikram would have wanted his ashes in the Mula Mutha River in Pune, where his father's ashes had gone before him, where his grandfather's ashes had gone before that. He would have wanted it done properly, with his brothers present, with the correct prayers, in the city that had known his name before any other city did. I told Aryan yes, we should send the ashes to India, and then I said something I have thought about. Many times since, I said, "Your father should have gone back while he could." And Aryan looked at me with an expression I could not fully read, something between guilt and helplessness and the particular sorrow of a child who understands for the first time that their parents had a life that had nothing to do with them. He said, "I know, Mama, I know." And we did not say anything else about it because there was nothing else to say that would not hurt more than the silence. Vikram's ashes went to Pune with his brother Suresh, who had flown to Austin for the ceremony, and flew back carrying a small urn wrapped in an orange cloth that I had packed myself. I watched Suresh walk toward the security line at Austin Airport, holding that package, and I felt something leave the room that had been in the room for 31 years. Not Vikram exactly, because Vikram had already left. Something else. The last physical thread of a life we had planned together and only partially lived. The first months after Vikram died are not months I can account for clearly. They happened, and I was in them. But the way you are in a dream, where you move and speak and appear to function, but the logic of the world has been suspended, and nothing quite connects to anything else the way it should. Aryan called it every day. Jessica brought food. Nadia, who was too young to grieve but not too young to feel the change, began coming to my apartment more often, appearing at the door with Jessica in the mornings and climbing onto my bed and sitting next to me while I drank my chai, not asking for anything, simply being there with the uncomplicated generosity that very young children have before the world, teaches them that presence requires a reason. Those mornings with Nadia saved me in a way that I am not sure she will ever fully know. I called my sister Kamini every day during those months. She answered every time, which I say not as something obvious, but as the specific and deliberate kindness it was, because Kamini had her own life, her own family, her own demands on her time, and she answered every time anyway. We talked for hours sometimes, about Vikram, about our childhood, about our parents who were both gone by then, about the particular loneliness of being a widow in a country that is not your own, which is a loneliness that has no precise translation in any language I know, but that Kamini understood, without needing it translated because she is my sister, and sisters understand the things that have no words. She asked me carefully, more than once, whether I had thought about coming back to India. She never pushed. She asked and then she waited, and when I said I did not know, yet she said, "Your room is here whenever you decide," and she moved on to other things. That is the right way to offer something to someone who is grieving. Not with insistence, with an open door and the patience to let the person find their own way to it. I thought about going back. I thought about it seriously, in the way you think about things at 3 a.m. when the apartment is quiet, and the absence of another person's breathing in the room is loud in a way that daytime never allows you to notice. I made the lists that widows make. What I had here, what I had there, what I would be leaving, what I would be returning to. Here I had Arian, I had Jessica, who had been genuinely kind to me in my grief in ways that went beyond obligation. I had Nadia, who was 3 years old and learning new words every day, and who said Daddy with an American accent that made my heart do something complicated every single time. Here I had my routine, small and emptied out as it was, but mine, the chai in the morning, the walk in the evening, the temple on Saturdays, the Indian women I had lunch with occasionally, women my age who understood certain things without explanation. There I had Kamini. I had my niece Rohini and her children. I had Nagpur, the city where I was born, where my parents were buried, where I had learned to read and to pray and to love in the specific way that a place teaches you to love before you know enough to choose it consciously. There I had the smell of the earth before the monsoon, the sound of temple bells in the morning, the particular quality of light in the late afternoon that exists nowhere else in the world, the way it exists in that part of Maharashtra. But every time I came close to a decision, something pulled me back. Not a reason exactly, something more like a feeling. The feeling of Nadia's weight on my lap at the cremation ceremony, the feeling of her voice saying, "Daddy." The feeling of being 12 minutes away from the only family I had left on this side of the world. I stayed. I have asked myself many times whether I stayed for Nadia, or whether I used Nadia as a reason to avoid a decision I was afraid to make. The honest answer is that I do not know. Perhaps both things were true at the same time, which is the way most important decisions work. We rarely do things for a single pure reason. We do them for a tangle of reasons, and we choose the one that sounds best when we have to explain ourselves, to others and to ourselves. What I know is that I stayed, and that staying did not look the way I had imagined staying would look. I had thought, in the blurred months after Vikram's death, that being close to Arian meant being present in his life, in a daily way. That proximity would translate into connection. That 12 minutes was close enough to feel like belonging. I was wrong about that too, and it was a slower kind of wrong, the kind you discover gradually, not all at once. Arian worked long hours. Jessica worked long hours. They had the life of young American professionals with a small child, which meant that their time was rationed with a precision that left very little margin for anything that was not directly necessary. I saw them on weekends usually, sometimes not even every weekend. I saw Nadia when they needed someone to watch her, which I did gladly, without ever counting or keeping record, because watching Nadia was not a favor I was doing for them, but something I wanted completely for myself. But there were weeks when I did not see any of them, weeks when my world was the apartment, the morning walk, the Saturday temple, the phone call with Kamini. Weeks when the silence in the rooms was so complete that I began talking to Vikram's photograph on the nightstand, not from grief exactly, or not only from grief, but from the simple human need to direct words at someone who knows who you are. I noticed things during those weeks that I had not let myself notice before. I noticed that my presence in Arian's life was peripheral in a way that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with the structure of the life he had built. I was not at the center of his daily world. I was at the edge, visible and loved, but not necessary, in the way that I had perhaps secretly hoped I would be necessary. His daily world was Jessica, Nadia, work, their friends, their routines. I was the grandmother who came on Sunday sometimes, the mother who called on her birthday, the woman who made Indian food that Nadia was starting to enjoy, which was its own small miracle, but who otherwise occupied a specific and limited space in a life that was already very full. I began to understand something that I think I had known for a long time but had not allowed myself to know completely. I had stayed in America for Arian when he was young because he needed me and I was his mother, and that was the right thing to do. I had stayed later because of the promise of a life Vikram and I were going to build together. And then I had stayed after Vikram died because of Nadia, and because of fear, and because going back felt like a second loss on top of a loss I was still learning to carry. But the staying, each time, had been built on a reason that was either finished or was not quite what I had believed it to be. Arian did not need me the way he once had. That was not a failure. It was the correct outcome of a childhood done right. A child who still needs his mother at 42 is a child who was not properly released into his own life. Arian had been properly released. He was a good man, a present father, a loving husband, and he loved me in the real and genuine way that adult children love their parents, which is differently from how children love their parents, with less daily urgency and more periodic depth. It was enough. It was real. But it was not the same as belonging. One evening in November, almost 2 years after Vikram died, I was sitting in my apartment with a cup of chai that had gone cold because I had forgotten to drink it, looking at the photograph of Vikram and me that sits on the table near the window. It was taken in Nagpur, at my sister Kamini's house, 20 years ago. We were both laughing at something that happened a second before the click. I no longer remember what, and we look in that photograph like people who are entirely at home in the moment they are in. I looked at that photograph for a long time, and then I looked around the apartment. At the walls I had painted a warm yellow to make them feel less like a rental. At the small altar in the corner with Vikram's photograph, and the gods I had brought from India in 1997 and carried with me through every move since. At the window that looked out onto an Austin street that was perfectly pleasant and entirely foreign to everything that had formed me. And I thought about what Vikram had said in that hospital room. Not to me, to a city, to the city that was his first address, his original self, the place where he had learned what it meant to be Vikram, before America taught him what it meant to be an immigrant. Pune. I thought about promises, about fireflies, about an orange cloth wrapped around a small urn, about a river in Pune, where a man's ashes had gone to join his father's and his grandfather's, carried there by a brother because the man himself had not been able to go. And I thought, for the first time not as a question, but as something closer to a conclusion, about what I owed myself, not what I owed Arian, not what I owed Nadia, not what I owed the memory of Vikram, or the life we had built, or the country that had housed us for 28 years. What I owed Priya, the woman who had come here at 29, with one suitcase, and a child who asked too many questions, and a husband who pointed at a mailbox with their name on it, as if it were proof of something permanent. What did that woman deserve, now that she was 57 years old and alone in an apartment in Austin, with a cold cup of chai and a photograph on the table that showed 2 people laughing in Nagpur 20 years ago? I did not answer the question that night, but I did not look away from it either. And that, I have learned, is where decisions begin, not in the answering, in the willingness to finally, fully look. I told Arian on a Sunday. I chose Sunday because Sunday is the day we were most likely to be together, without the pressure of work schedules creating a clock in the background of every conversation. I had been to their house for lunch, Jessica had made pasta. Nadia had eaten with the focused intensity she brings to everything she does. And afterward, Arian and I sat on the back porch with our tea while Jessica put Nadia down for her nap. It was a warm Austin afternoon, the kind that makes you understand why people choose to live here. Wide sky, dry air, the particular stillness of a Sunday that has nowhere to be. I waited until the tea was half finished. Then I said, "Arian, I need to tell you something I have been thinking about for a long time." He looked at me over his cup. He has Vikram's eyes, my son, the same quality of attention, the same stillness before speaking. He said, "Okay, Mama, tell me." I told him I was going back to India. The silence that followed was not the silence of surprise exactly. It was the silence of someone receiving news they had perhaps felt coming without knowing they had felt it. He put down his cup. He looked at the garden, which was Jessica's project and was full of things I could not name in English or in Hindi, American flowers for an American garden. Then he looked back at me. He asked how long. I told him not for a visit. I told him I was going to go back to Nagpur, to my sister Kamini's house, to spend whatever time I had left in the place where I was born. I told him I had thought about it for 2 years, that it was not an impulsive decision, that it was the most considered decision I had made since the decision to come here, in the first place. I told him I loved him, and I loved Jessica, and I loved Nadia, with a love that had no adequate words in any language I knew. And I told him that loving them was not the same as belonging here, that I had learned, slowly and at great cost, that those were 2 separate things, and that confusing them had already cost Vikram and me the life we had promised each other. When I said Vikram's name, something shifted in Arian's face. Not quite pain, something more precise than pain. The specific expression of a child who is understanding for the first time, fully and without the protection of youth, that his parents were people before they were his parents, that they had dreams that had nothing to do with him, that those dreams had been set aside, year after year, for reasons that included him, and that the setting aside had consequences he was only now being asked to reckon with. He was quiet for a long time. The garden was very still. Somewhere inside the house, Nadia was sleeping. Then he said, "Mama, I always thought you were happy here." I looked at my son. I thought about how to answer that truthfully, without cruelty. I said I was not unhappy, Arian. There is a difference. I built a life here and there were real things in it. Real love, real moments, real happiness, of the kind that comes in flashes, inside a life that is not quite right. But I was never fully here. Part of me was always somewhere else. I think you knew that, even if you never named it. He did not deny it. He looked at his hands and then he looked at me and he said, "I feel like I failed you." And I said immediately, without hesitation because it was absolutely true, "You did not fail me. You were a child. And then you were an adult living your life, which is what I raised you to do. The failing, if there was one, was mine and your father's. We kept choosing to wait. We kept thinking there would be more time. And then there was not." Jessica came out then with a fresh pot of tea and understood immediately from the quality of the silence that something important had been happening. She sat down without asking and poured tea for everyone, and that small act of grace, the not asking, the simply being present, made me feel toward her what I had always felt, but perhaps never said clearly enough. I looked at her and I said, "Jessica, you have been good to me, better than I had any right to expect." She looked surprised, as people do when they receive a direct compliment without warning. She said, "You are family, Priya." And she meant it. I could hear that she meant it. I told them I was not leaving immediately, that I wanted to spend 2 more months in Austin, that I wanted that time with Nadia, that I wanted to do things properly, carefully, without the feeling of flight or escape that I had spent 2 years being afraid this decision would feel like. I wanted it to feel like what it actually was, a choice, made freely, with full knowledge of what it cost and what it gave. Those 2 months were the most present I had been in Austin in all the years I had lived there. Something releases in a person when a decision is finally made, when the long work of choosing is finished and what remains is simply the living of the time that is left in a place. I noticed things I had stopped noticing, the way the light came through my kitchen window in the mornings, the sound of the neighborhood in the early evening, the specific weight of Nadia in my arms when she fell asleep against my shoulder, which happened twice in those 2 months, and which I held onto with the careful attention of someone who knows they are storing something for a long winter. I cooked every Sunday, not for any particular occasion, simply because cooking is the closest I have to prayer, outside of actual prayer, the closest I come to the feeling of being entirely in the right place, doing the right thing. I made dishes from Nagpur, from Maharashtra, dishes my mother had taught me, and that I had been making in foreign kitchens for 28 years, always slightly adapted, always slightly missing one ingredient that could not be found in American supermarkets, always almost right, but not quite. I made them, and Arian ate them with the serious appreciation of an adult who has finally stopped pretending that his mother's food is merely food. Jessica ate them and asked questions about the spices, and Nadia, my granddaughter with her American accent and her big, serious eyes that reminded me of Vikram's mother, ate them and said, "Daddy, this is my favorite," which she said about everything I made, but which I believed every time. The night before my flight, Arian came to my apartment alone. Jessica had stayed home with Nadia, which I think was a deliberate gift, the understanding that there are conversations between mothers and sons that need a particular privacy. He sat in the chair across from me, and we talked for 3 hours. We talked about Vikram. We talked about the promise and the fireflies and the years of waiting. We talked about Nadia, and about the kind of grandmother I would be from 12,000 kilometers away, which was a real conversation, practical and specific, about video calls and visits and the Hindi words I intended to teach her through the phone, even if I could not be there, to point at the objects in the room. We talked about India, and about America, and about the particular fate of people who belong completely to one place and spend their lives in another. At some point, somewhere in the middle of that conversation, Arian said something I had not expected. He said, "Mama, I am sorry we did not go back sooner. I am sorry that Papa did not get to go home. I know that is partly because of me. Because every time you were about to leave, something happened with me. University, the job, Jessica, Nadia, and you stayed. I know you stayed for me, and I never said thank you for that, and I am saying it now." I looked at my son for a long moment. Then I said, "Arian, I did not stay as a sacrifice. I stayed because I wanted to. Every time I chose to stay, I was choosing you, and I would make those same choices again. But I have also learned something in the last 2 years that your father did not have the time to learn. I have learned that choosing others does not mean permanently losing the right to choose yourself. I learned it late, but I learned it." He cried then, quietly, the way Vikram used to cry, without drama, without wanting to be seen doing it but not trying to hide it either. I put my hand on his and we sat like that for a while without speaking, which is the best kind of conversation, the kind where nothing needs to be added because what is already present between 2 people is enough. The next morning he drove me to the airport. Jessica and Nadia came too. Nadia wore a yellow dress and carried a small stuffed elephant she had named, with the creative logic of 4-year-olds. Elephant. She did not fully understand that I was going far away for a long time. Children that age live in a present tense that is mercifully free of geography. She hugged me at the security line with the wholehearted physical enthusiasm that she brings to all hugs, her whole small body pressing against me, as if she intended to leave an impression. She did leave an impression. She always does. I hugged Jessica. I held Arian for a moment longer than I usually hold him, the way you hold someone when you are memorizing the feeling rather than just experiencing it. He said, "Call me when you land." I said, "I will." He said, "We will come visit in the spring." I said, "Kamini will cook for you." He almost smiled. I walked through security, and I did not look back, not because it did not hurt, but because some thresholds are better crossed without looking back. The looking back is for later, for the quiet moments, for the mornings with chai, when the heart has enough room to hold both the leaving and the love without one cancelling out the other. Kamini was at the airport in Nagpur. She had come with her daughter Rohini and Rohini's youngest, a girl of 7 who looked at me with the frank curiosity of a child who has heard a great deal about someone and is now assessing whether the person matches the description. Kamini held me for a long time without saying anything. She smells the same as she did when we were girls, which is something I had forgotten, and then remembered completely the moment she put her arms around me. Some things the body keeps that the mind has mislaid. She had prepared my room, a new curtain on the window, fresh flowers on the small table near the bed, a photograph of our mother framed and placed where I would see it first thing in the morning. That last detail undid me completely. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at our mother's photograph and cried in a way I had not cried since those first months after Vikram died. The full kind of crying, the kind with no audience and no management, the kind that is simply the body releasing something it has been holding for longer than it should have been held. That night we sat on Kamini's veranda drinking milky coffee, the real kind, made the right way, and the air smelled of something I had carried in my memory for 28 years, without being entirely sure it was real, and not something my longing had invented. It was real. The smell of Nagpur in the evening, the particular combination of earth and flowers and something sweet and slightly smoky that I have never been able to name but have always recognized, was completely and entirely real. I thought about Vikram. I thought about how he would have sat in the chair beside me with his own cup of coffee, and how he would have been quiet for a long time before saying something small and true about the night air. I thought about the promise, about all the years we had meant to do this together and had not, about the word Pune spoken in a hospital room in Austin in a voice that was almost no voice at all. I thought, you should be here. You should have been here years ago. We both should. And then I thought, I am here now, for both of us. I am here now. I looked at the stars over Nagpur, which are different from the stars over Austin, in a way I cannot explain scientifically, but that I know to be true. I held my cup of coffee. My sister was beside me. Inside the house, her grandchildren were sleeping. I was not happy the way people are happy, in simple moments that require nothing of them. I was happy the way you are happy, when something has cost you enormously, and you have paid the cost and arrived on the other side, and found that the thing you were moving toward was real. A more serious happiness, the kind with weight and history in it. The suitcase I had packed in Austin was open on the floor of my room, half unpacked. On top of the clothes was Vikram's photograph, the one from Nagpur, the one where we are both laughing at something that happened a second before the click. I would put it on the table in the morning, next to the photograph of my mother, the two of them there together, watching over the room where I would finally, after 28 years, learn what it meant to sleep without the low, continuous hum of belonging somewhere else. Tomorrow I would call Arian. I would talk to Nadia. I would begin the life of a woman who loves her son and her granddaughter across 12,000 kilometers and who has learned at 57 years old that distance does not diminish love. It changes its shape. It makes it more deliberate, more chosen, more conscious of itself, but it does not diminish it. Tonight I would sit on this veranda with my sister until the coffee was gone, and the night said it was time to sleep. Tonight, I was simply home.